And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Marine forecast for the south coast tomorrow, south winds 10 to 15 knots. Central coast, south to southeast at 10 and southeast at 10 for the north coast. Seas running 5 to 6 feet. And for the inside waters, light variable winds and seas 2 feet or less. Outlook for Wednesday. Clarence Strait, southeast breeze at 10 knots. Same thing for Stevens Passage. Seas staying down around 2 feet or so. And for Lynn Canal, south winds 15 knots with 3-foot seas. And for the south coast, south winds at 15, south to southeast at 20 for the central coast, and east-southeast at 20 for the north coast. For Prince William Sound, east winds 15 knots for the day on Tuesday. East-southeast 15 for the eastern North Gulf Coast. East at 20 here for the west side. Southeast 20 for the Barren Islands. Kamishak Bay, small craft advisories. East winds 25 knots, seas 7 feet. And for Cook Inlet, northeasterlies at 15. And then for Wednesday, kind of a variable wind pattern here for Cook Inlet at 10 to 15 knots, 3 to 4 foot seas. Barren Islands, Kamishak Bay, easterly winds at 20 knots. For the North Gulf Coast, variable winds at 10 knots. Prince William Sound, east winds at 10 knots with 2-foot seas. And for Kodiak Island for Tuesday, east and southeast winds, 15 knots, seas running 4 to 6 feet. And for the Alaska Peninsula, south to south and southeast winds, 15 to 20 knots, seas at about 3 to 6 feet there. And for Bristol Bay, southeast at 20 with 3-foot seas. And for Wednesday, for the Alaska Peninsula, southwest, 15 knots in the forecast with 4 to 5 foot seas. Bristol Bay, looking at easterly winds at about 15 knots there. And south to northeast winds here for Kodiak Island at about 15 knots with 4 to 5 foot seas. Small craft advisories here for all of the Aleutians, specifically for the eastern Aleutians. West winds 25 knots tomorrow, 7 to 8 foot seas. West-southwest 25 to 30 knots for Adak and Atka. And Amchitka to Shemya. West winds 30 knots, seas 7 feet. And then for Wednesday, lighter winds with westerlies 15 to 25 knots for the western Aleutians, seas at about 5 to 7 feet. Northwest 15 with 4 to 5 foot seas for Adak and Atka. Eastern Aleutians, northwest wind 20 knots with seas 5 to 6 feet. And for the southwest coast here, northeast at 15 for the Yukon Delta Coast, Kuskokwim Delta Coast, east at 20 knots. North 20 for the Pribilof Islands and northeast at 15 for St. Matthew Island. St. Lawrence Island and Norton Sound both looking at an easterly wind at 15 for the day on Tuesday. Then for Wednesday, for St. Lawrence Island, northeast wind 15 knots. Same thing for the Yukon Delta Coast. Norton Sound northeast at about 10 with seas around roughly at 2 feet. St. Matthew Island, northern Bering Sea, winds north at 15 knots with 4-foot seas turning northwest at 15 for the Pribilofs. And here for the southwest coast, south of Nunivak Island, winds east at 15. Up to the north, eastern Boulevard Sea coast, looking at east winds at 10 knots. Then southwest 10 for the central coast, southwest 15 there for the west side, the Chukchi Sea south to southeast at 10 to 15 knots. And then for Wednesday, Chukchi Sea northwest, 15 to 20 knots, and north to northeast at 20 knots for the western Arctic coast. Central coast east at about 15 knots, and then easterlies at 20 knots there for the east side. And taking a look at tonight's weather again, got this trough kind of stalled out over the central and northern panhandle for continuous light rain, fog, drizzle there, drier down to the south. Scattering out showers along the North Gulf Coast and over the Cop River Basin. Moisture kind of on the increase here along the Yukon River. In the eastern interior, some moisture starts to slide westward into the interior. And rain, fog, light rain and fog, Kodiak Island with this next front up into Bristol Bay, Kuskokwim Delta, and over the Alaska Peninsula. Tomorrow that low doesn't move much and the front kind of reorients itself something like this, keeping it wet for Kodiak Island and over the southwest part of the state. Scattered thunderstorms tomorrow afternoon. Not too bad for the panhandle. And then for Wednesday, More rain for the southeast coast, about the same in the interior.